It starts with a simple walk to the bus. Stop a father and his son, just beginning their day. But when a crooked cop slams on the brakes and decides that this black boy looks suspicious, everything changes. He thinks he's intimidating a child. He thinks he's humiliating a family. What he doesn't know is that the man standing beside that boy is no ordinary father. He's the sheriff. And what comes next? It's not just revenge, it's reckoning. This is a story about power misused, silence broken, and the unstoppable force of a parent fighting back with the law in his hands and justice in his heart. And trust me, by the time this is over, you'll see why you should never underestimate the quiet ones. So before we jump in, let us know what time you're listening and where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. We love hearing your voice. And if you believe in stories that shake the system, stick around. It was one of those calm Alabama mornings where the sun peeks through the tree branches just right, casting long shadows on the sidewalk, and the world feels like it's in no rush. A soft breeze rustled the magnolia leaves, and the neighborhood was slowly waking up, sprinklers ticking in front yards, dogs barking in the distance, and a few early risers sipping coffee on their porches. Sheriff Darnell Brooks walked side by side with his 13-year-old son, Tyler. No uniform today, just a plain sweatshirt and jeans. He didn't need the badge this morning. What he needed was a little quiet time with his boy. These were their moments walking to the bus stop, talking about nothing and everything. Tyler had his backpack slung over one shoulder, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping a folded $10 bill like it was treasure. And to him, it was. That $10 was his weekly allowance, earned by helping his mom clean out the garage and organizing the pantry, just the way she liked it. He was planning to use it on snacks and maybe a new chess magazine from the school library. Tyler looked up at his father with that curious spark he always had. Do you think the vending machines at school will ever take debit cards? Cash is so old school, Darnell chuckled. They probably want to keep you learning how to budget the hard way. They both laughed. It was easy, natural. For a brief moment, it felt like the world was right. Then came the sound. Tires screeched against the asphalt, loud and deliberate like punctuation tearing through the peace. A black and white police cruiser swerved toward the curb and came to an aggressive stop just feet from where they stood. Darnell instinctively stepped slightly in front of Tyler. His entire body tensed, not out of fear, but muscle memory. That sound meant trouble. And even after all these years wearing the badge himself, he knew too well that trouble sometimes looked just like this. The car door flung open with authority. Out stepped Officer Calvin Rourke, mid-40s. Stocky build, mirrored sunglasses, and a chip on his shoulder bigger than the car he drove. Darnell recognized him immediately. Rourke was known across departments not for valor or community work, but for how quickly he could escalate a situation and how often complaints seemed to go missing. Rourke adjusted his belt, squared his shoulders, and started walking toward them like he owned the street. "What do we have here?" he said with a smirk, his voice just loud enough to carry a threat beneath the words. Tyler froze. The $10 bill crinkled tighter in his fist. Darnell's tone stayed calm, even as his pulse quickened. "Morning, officer. Just waiting for the school bus." Rourke didn't even glance at Darnell. His focus was locked on the boy. "That so?" He took another step, then another, eyes scanning Tyler from head to toe. "You look a little nervous there, son. Got anything you shouldn't have?" Darnell's voice lowered an octave. He was still trying to de-escalate. "He's my son, and he hasn't done anything wrong." Finally, Rourke turned his head, ever so slowly, as if acknowledging Darnell was optional. "Wasn't talking to you," he said. "Unless you want to get involved, I suggest you step back." For a split second, Darnell considered it, saying something more, raising his voice, but he saw Tyler's hands start to tremble and knew this wasn't about pride. It was about protection. And right now, Tyler needed to know that his father could keep him safe, even if it meant waiting, even if it meant biting his tongue. And so he stood there, silent but alert, as Rourke took one more step forward. "That," was the moment everything shifted. The air felt heavier now. That calm southern morning had twisted into something sharp, charged. Officer Rourke stood just inches away from Tyler, sunglasses hiding whatever expression might have softened his face if there was one. But his tone made it clear. This wasn't about a safety check. It was about power, and Rourke was about to make sure everyone on that sidewalk knew who had it. "All right, kid," Rourke said, tilting his head. "Empty your pockets." Tyler hesitated, not because he had anything to hide, but because his father had always told him to stay calm, stay respectful, and never move too fast when facing a cop, especially a white one. His fingers clutched the $10 bill tighter, and he looked up at Darnell for guidance. Darnell stepped forward slightly, steady voice and calm hands. "Officer, that's not necessary. He's 13. We're just headed to school." But Rourke didn't budge. In fact, his jaw clenched. "Did I stutter?" he snapped, now staring down Tyler like he was a suspect on the run. "I said, empty your pockets." Darnell was ready to say something more, but before he could, Rourke reached out and grabbed Tyler's wrist. "Hey!" Darnell barked, instinctively stepping in, but Rourke had already yanked the bill from the boy's hand. "What's this?" he said, holding the crumpled $10 note up like it was a piece of bloody evidence. "Where'd you get this, huh? Steal it from somebody?" Tyler's face flushed red. "No, sir. It's my allowance." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "Allowance?" he said with a smirk, then turned to Darnell with mock surprise. "Kids like this get allowances now?" He held up the 10, folded it once, then slid it into his pocket. "Confiscated," he said casually. "Can't have stolen property out here in public." Darnell's fists clenched, his heart pounding in his ears. But still, he didn't move. Not yet. "Officer, you have no right to do that," he said firmly. "I have every right," Rourke replied, stepping back toward his cruiser. "And unless you want to be arrested for obstruction, I suggest you keep your voice down." A few neighbors had stopped on their lawns now, some watching in silence, others lifting their phones to record. The tension was crackling like summer lightning before the storm. Rourke turned once more before opening his door. "Next time," he said, looking at Tyler, "maybe don't walk around looking like you've got something to hide. Maybe then you'll stay out of trouble." And with that, he climbed back into his cruiser and drove off casual, unbothered, smug. Tyler turned to his father, eyes wet, voice shaking. "Dad, he took my money. He just took it." "Why didn't you stop him?" Darnell knelt down, his voice thick with quiet pain. "Because if I'd tried to stop him the way I wanted to, it wouldn't have helped you. And it wouldn't have ended here." "But you're—" Tyler began. "I know who I am," Darnell said, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "And I know who he is. But this isn't the end, son. This is the beginning." They stood there for a moment, still and silent in the wake of the storm. But the real storm? The one Rourke had unknowingly unleashed? That was still to come. Because what Officer Rourke didn't see, what he didn't bother to notice, was the small silver badge glinting beneath the hem of Darnell's jacket when the wind caught it just right. The badge that read, Sheriff. The man he'd tried to humiliate wasn't just a father. He was the law. And the law was about to come knocking. For a few long seconds after the police cruiser rolled away, the world just stood still. The birds kept chirping. The sun kept rising. But for Darnell Brooks, the air had turned lead-heavy. He looked down at his son, at the way Tyler's small frame was locked in place, like fear had frozen him. The $10 bill was gone. So was the light in his eyes. And what replaced it wasn't just sadness, it was shame. They didn't speak. As the school bus came around the corner, Tyler climbed aboard without a word. Darnell stood on the sidewalk, his hands still clenched, watching through the dusty bus window as his son sat down by himself and stared blankly ahead. He didn't look back. The bus pulled away, leaving a trail of diesel fumes and dust behind. Darnell didn't move for a while. He just stood there on that ordinary corner, in that ordinary neighborhood, trying to process the extraordinary violation they'd just experienced. He was a sheriff, He'd worn the uniform for decades. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Not the badge, not the oath, not the years of service. Because to Officer Rourke, he was just another black man standing on the street. Darnell turned and walked home, each step heavier than the last. When he opened the door, the house was still quiet. Grace hadn't left for work yet. She looked up from the kitchen table, coffee in hand, the way she always did, reading his face before he even spoke. "What happened?" she asked immediately. Darnell didn't answer right away. He sat down, took off his jacket, and placed it on the back of the chair. Then he told her everything. From the moment the cruiser screeched to a halt, to the second that Officer pocketed their son's money like it meant nothing. Grace didn't interrupt. She didn't blink. She just listened, her face growing tighter with every word. When he finished, she exhaled slowly, setting her cup down harder than she meant to. "This isn't the first time, Darnell, and you know it won't be the last." He nodded, rubbing his hands together. "I know. You let him take that boy's money." Her voice wasn't cruel, it was pained. "You let him treat your son like a criminal. In front of him. In front of God and everybody." Darnell looked up, guilt carving lines deeper into his face. "I let him walk away, so Tyler could walk away too." Grace stood, crossed her arms, and leaned against the counter. "So now what? File a complaint? How many of those have we seen buried in some drawer? He'll get desk duty for a week, and we'll get labeled as troublemakers." He didn't argue. He couldn't, because she was right. They'd both seen it happen too many times. Good people doing the right thing, only to get steamrolled by a system that protected its own. "I'm going to handle it," he said quietly. Grace tilted her head, arms still crossed. "Handle it how?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But this isn't just some random incident, Grace. That man violated our son. I'm not walking away from this one." She stared at him for a long beat, then nodded once. "Good, because if you did, I'd never forgive you." Upstairs, the faint sound of a door closing reminded them that Tyler was home after all. Grace's expression softened, and she walked out of the room without another word. Darnell sat in the silence, staring at the jacket hanging on his chair. The badge inside it weighed more now than it ever had before. Later that evening, after the sun dipped low and painted the kitchen walls gold, Darnell knocked gently on Tyler's door. "Can I come in?" There was no answer, but he opened the door anyway. Tyler sat on his bed, hoodie on, earbuds in, staring at the wall. Not a TV, not a game, just the wall. That hit Darnell harder than any slap could have. He walked over and sat at the edge of the bed, giving the boy space. "Ty," he said gently. The boy didn't move. "I know you're upset, and you have every right to be." Still nothing. Then, finally, Tyler pulled one earbud out and turned slowly toward his father. "You didn't do anything," he said flatly. Darnell closed his eyes for a second, absorbing the blow. "I wanted to, believe me, son. But if I had said the wrong thing, moved the wrong way, you could have gotten hurt. Or worse." "You're a sheriff," Tyler whispered, "and he still took my money. Like I was a thief." The words hit like knives. Darnell reached out and placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "You are not what he tried to make you feel like. You're not small, you're not suspicious. And you're not alone. I saw it happen, and I'm going to do something about it. I promise you." Tyler blinked hard. "He looked at me like I was nothing, Dad." Darnell's voice trembled, just a little. "And I'm going to make sure he learns who you are." They sat there together for a while. No more words, just the quiet understanding between a father and a son. A bond tested, but not broken. Downstairs, Darnell opened his desk drawer and pulled out a worn manila folder. Inside were names, dates, incident numbers, things he'd quietly kept over the years, things he hoped he'd never need, until now, because Officer Calvin Rourke wasn't just a problem. He was a pattern, a symptom of something deeper, and Darnell Brooks was done being silent. The next morning came quietly, like nothing had happened. But inside the Brooks household, everything had changed. Tyler sat at the kitchen table, silent, poking at his scrambled eggs like they were some unsolvable riddle. Across from him, Darnell sipped his coffee, eyes focused but far away. Grace moved through the kitchen, her usual calm replaced by the kind of tension that hums just beneath the surface-tight shoulders, clipped movements, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Tyler finally broke the silence. "Can I just stay home today?" Darnell looked up, considering it. But before he could answer, Grace stepped in. "No," she said firmly, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "You go to school. You hold your head high. That man doesn't get to take more than he already has." Tyler looked down, nodded, and quietly returned to his food. Darnell respected Grace for that, her strength, her clarity. But he also knew the storm she was holding back, and he knew she was right. Rourke didn't just take a $10 bill, he took something from Tyler that was harder to replace. Trust, innocence, the belief that the world was as fair as the rules said it should be. After Tyler left, the door clicked shut with a heavy finality. Grace turned to Darnell, arms crossed. "So what's your plan?" "I'm not rushing this," he said, carefully choosing his words. "If I go at this the wrong way, it'll get swept under the rug like all the others." Grace narrowed her eyes. "You think playing it safe will make a difference this time?" "No," Darnell said. "I think playing it smart will." She sighed and leaned against the counter. "We both know how this works. You file a complaint, maybe talk to internal affairs, and then nothing. He gets moved to a different beat. And Tyler still remembers that no one did anything." Darnell didn't argue, because again, she wasn't wrong. He'd watched this system up close for years. He knew how fast it could circle the wagons, how fast a bad officer could get covered by paperwork, silence, and convenient memory lapses. But this time, something was different. This time, it was personal. Later that day, Darnell sat in his home office. The door cracked just enough to hear the faint sounds of life going on downstairs. Grace on a work call, dishes clinking. Normalcy trying to crawl its way back in. He opened a secure drawer and pulled out an envelope labeled in his own handwriting, "Unresolved." Inside were copies of complaints from local citizen stories that never made the news, calls that never got returned. A woman harassed for walking her dog at dusk. A teenage boy slammed against a patrol car for matching a vague description. A young man shoved and searched on his way home from work. Nothing found, no apology given. Most of these names were attached to one officer, Calvin Rourke. Darnell had always kept these stories, not because he didn't trust the process, but because he knew the process couldn't always be trusted. He picked up the phone and called Deputy Carla Mendez. "Carla," he said, "I need a favor. Quiet. Off the record." Carla didn't hesitate. "How bad is it?" "Worse than it looks. I'm in." Within hours, Carla was in his office, a folder in hand, face tight with concern. "I pulled every incident report with Rourke's name attached in the last 5 years," she said. "And what I found. It's not good, Darnell. There's a pattern. He targets young black men, teenagers, sometimes even kids. Always uses vague language in his reports. Suspicious behavior, non-compliance, matching a description. But when you line up the complaints with the times and locations, it's a straight line." Darnell's jaw tightened. "And how many of these were formally investigated?" Carla lowered her voice. "Only one. And it was dismissed. Lack of evidence." Of course it was. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. It looked so normal out there, so calm. But that was the thing about places like this: things didn't have to explode to be broken. Sometimes the worst damage happened quietly, slowly, while everyone looked the other way. He turned back to Carla. "I need more. Witnesses, staff footage. Anything that can't be ignored." Carla nodded. "I'll start digging." As she left, Darnell sat back down at his desk, his mind racing. There was a right way to do this. And there was a real way to do it. He was going to walk the line between both, and he was going to make damn sure no one could bury this under a stack of paperwork. That night, over dinner, The tension still hung in the air. Tyler pushed food around his plate again, barely speaking. Darnell watched him, heart breaking in quiet pieces. Afterward, while Grace cleared the dishes, Darnell motioned for Tyler to come outside. They sat on the front porch, just the two of them, wrapped in the cool southern evening. "I know you're still upset," Darnell said. Tyler didn't reply. "I know it felt like I didn't do anything, and I need you to understand something. I didn't let it go. I just didn't want to make it worse. I had to make sure you were safe first." Tyler finally looked up. "Is it going to matter? Are you really going to do something?" Darnell nodded, voice steady. "Yes, I already started. And I'm not stopping. Not until he's held accountable." Tyler didn't speak again, but the look in his eyes shifted just a little, like a small part of him dared to believe it might be true. And that, right there, was the beginning of something. Darnell sat alone in his office long after the house had gone quiet. Grace had turned in early, and Tyler had retreated to his room, earbuds in, trying to block out the world. But Darnell couldn't sleep, not with the weight of everything pressing on his chest like a loaded vest. He opened the drawer to his left, the one he hadn't touched in months. Inside, beneath old field notes and faded departmental memos, was a small, locked case. He clicked it open and pulled out his badge, the same one that had been with him through arrests, search warrants, city council meetings, and night patrols. The silver star gleamed faintly under the lamp, but tonight it felt heavier than ever. Not just because of what it represented, but because of how little it had meant in that moment when his son needed protection. He stared at it for a long time before setting it down and picking up his phone. There was only one person he trusted to help him move without making noise, and that was Deputy Carla Mendez. Carla had been his right hand since the day he stepped into the role of sheriff. Smart, methodical, and as fearless as they come, she had a gut for people and a mind for details. More importantly, she knew the unspoken rules: when to speak, when to dig, and when to stay quiet. She answered on the second ring. "Darnell, the first needs your help." Her voice sharpened. "Tell me when and where." The next morning, Carla met him at the office before sunrise. She arrived in plain clothes, a neutral expression hiding the concern in her eyes. Darnell closed the door behind her and handed her a folder. "This is everything I've got so far on Rourke. Complaints from civilians, 2 internal memos that went nowhere, and 1 incident from 3 years ago that was never filed officially. I need you to find more. Anything that connects dots." Carla sat down, flipping through the folder. She didn't speak for several minutes, her eyes scanning the pages quickly but carefully. "You've been sitting on this?" she finally asked. "I've been watching, waiting, hoping it wouldn't go where I feared it would." Carla looked up. "And now?" "Now, it's personal. He humiliated my son, and I can't pretend I didn't see what I saw." Carla nodded slowly. "You know this won't stay quiet for long. I don't need quiet. I need evidence. Hard, undeniable proof. If I go at him without it, they'll say I'm overreacting because it's my kid. They'll bury it under departmental loyalty." She leaned back in the chair. "All right. I'll start with dispatch records, body cam logs, traffic stop reports. If he's been dirty, it'll be in there somewhere. Thank you, Carla. And be discreet." She gave him a look. "Always." After she left, Darnell sat still for a while, fingers laced together, eyes fixed on the clock ticking softly on the wall. This wasn't how he expected the week to go. He thought maybe they'd argue about curfews or grades, normal father-son stuff. But instead, he was planning how to hold one of his own officers accountable, not just for what he did to Tyler, but for what he'd likely done to others, who didn't have a sheriff for a father. By noon, Carla texted him with a short update, found 3 stops that matched the pattern. All minors, all black, 2 never documented. Darnell's jaw tightened. It was what he expected. And still, it made his stomach turn. He called in a favor with a retired judge who used to sit on the county board, then another with a community organizer who'd worked on civil rights cases in the state capitol. People he trusted. People who remembered what justice was supposed to look like. He wasn't just building a case. He was building a wall one Rourke couldn't climb, dodge, or tear down with his usual tricks. That evening, he sat with Grace at the kitchen table. She read over one of the complaints. Carla had uncovered a 16-year-old boy who was stopped walking home from basketball practice. No reason given, no report filed. Just bruises, intimidation, and silence. Grace shook her head. It's always the same story. Different names, different years. But always the same ending. Not this time, Darnell said. This time, the story ends with a name being held accountable. She didn't smile, but she placed her hand over his and squeezed it gently. You sure you're ready for the blowback? Darnell nodded. Let it come. Later that night, Tyler knocked on his office door. You busy? He asked, already stepping inside. Never too busy for you. Tyler sat across from his father, glancing at the documents on the desk. Is all that about him? Darnell paused. Yeah, it is. Tyler's voice was soft. Are you gonna get in trouble? A small, tired smile crossed Darnell's face. Probably. Tyler nodded slowly. Is it worth it? Darnell looked him square in the eye. If it means you never have to feel powerless like that again, then yes, every bit of it. Tyler didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. The look on his face said enough. By the next morning, Carla had delivered even more. Old patrol logs with missing body cam footage. Witness statements that were mysteriously unsigned. One in particular stood out: a clerk at a gas station who'd seen Rourke rough up a young man over loitering, then leave without filing a single word of paperwork. They had a pattern. They had proof. Now they needed a plan. Darnell spent the afternoon preparing a timeline. Every incident, every date, every voice that had gone ignored. If he was going to take this to the department heads and possibly state officials, he needed it airtight. Carla watched him work, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. You know this could split the department in half, right? I'm counting on it, Darnell said without missing a beat. She raised an eyebrow. That's cold. No, he replied. That's justice. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Darnell sat alone with a copy of the complaint. Tyler would file in the morning, not just as a boy whose allowance was stolen, but as a young citizen whose rights were trampled by a man sworn to protect them. Darnell read it once more, then signed his name beside it, not just as Tyler's father, but as sheriff. This was no longer just about one moment on a street corner. This was about everything that had led up to it, and everything he was willing to do to make sure it never happened again. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of paperwork, hushed meetings, and growing tension. Darnell didn't say much to his colleagues, and when he did, his voice was low, deliberate. He wasn't looking for confrontation yet, but he knew it was coming. When you start pulling on threads like this, eventually, something unravels. Carla worked in the background like a ghost, piecing together the puzzle that no one in the department wanted to admit existed. The further she dug, the worse it got. Rourke wasn't just sloppy, he was dangerous. A bully with a badge. His reports were riddled with vague language and conveniently missing video files. He had a talent for just towing the line, never quite enough to raise alarms, always enough to leave scars. Carla came to Darnell one morning with a folder so thick it could barely close. There's your pattern, she said. 5 years' worth. Stops, searches, excessive force. And almost all of them targeting young black men. Darnell didn't say a word. He just opened the folder and started reading. There was a kid named Darius, 15 at the time. He'd been stopped walking home from football practice. Rourke claimed he matched a suspect's description. No arrest, no report, just bruises and silence. Another case involved a single mother who had called the police for help, only for Rourke to accuse her teenage son of stealing from his own home. Then there were the body cam redactions videos that mysteriously cut out just before things got physical, or files that were never uploaded at all. It was a web, a history of intimidation and abuse, hiding in plain sight. This isn't just misconduct, Darnell said. It's a pattern of predation. And it's been protected, Carla added. Somebody higher up has been covering for him. These complaints should have triggered disciplinary review years ago. That was the part that made Darnell's blood go cold. It wasn't just about one man, it was about the silence that let him thrive. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "You still with me?" Carla asked. "Yeah," he replied, "but this just got a lot bigger." They spent the next few days tightening the case. Carla interviewed a few former officers who had worked with Rourke and left the force disillusioned. One of them, a rookie who'd transferred out within a year, admitted that Rourke had laughed about making examples out of kids who talked back. Another had witnessed him tampering with a body cam, but had stayed silent fear of retaliation. It was like everyone just knew to leave him alone, one said, like he had someone watching his back. Darnell wasn't surprised. He'd been in law enforcement long enough to know that culture doesn't protect victims, it protects insiders. But knowing it didn't make it easier to stomach. One night, after everyone had gone home, he sat in the station alone with the evidence board stretched across the wall. Photos, reports, incident dates. It looked like the kind of board you'd use to catch a serial criminal. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. He felt the weight of it all press into his chest. The fear, the rage, the responsibility. Tyler's face haunted him, not just from that awful morning on the sidewalk, but from the quiet moments afterward. The way his voice lost its music. The way he stared into his dinner like it didn't matter anymore. Darnell had taken oaths in his life. Sworn to protect and serve. Sworn to uphold the law. But this one was different. This was the promise of a father. He wouldn't let it go. He picked up the phone and called Reverend Porter, a longtime leader in the local black community. They had history-shared protests, funerals, even city negotiations. Porter had always been measured, but when he spoke, people listened. "Reverend," Darnell said, "I'm going to need your help." "You about to rock the boat, Sheriff?" Porter asked. "No, sir," Darnell said. "I'm about to flip it." By the end of the week, a quiet coalition had started to form. A local journalist agreed to start digging with a promise to wait until Darnell said the word. Civil rights advocates, a few brave department insiders, even a retired district judge, one by one, the circle widened. But not everyone was pleased. Darnell noticed it first in the hallways. Conversations that stopped when he entered. Side glances. A sergeant who used to call him boss now avoided eye contact. One afternoon, he found a note taped to his office door. No signature. Just a few words. "You're making enemies." He didn't flinch. That just meant he was getting close. Carla came in with another update. "I found the memo," she said. "An internal review from 3 years ago. Rourke should have been suspended, but someone overrode it." "Who?" Darnell asked. She handed him a printed email thread. "Lieutenant Harris." That one hit harder than he expected. Harris had been in the department longer than Darnell. They weren't friends, exactly, but there was mutual respect, or so he thought. "Covering for Rourke?" Darnell said aloud. Carla nodded. "And not just once. Looks like Harris has been ghostwriting reviews and shielding complaints." "Might be more," Darnell exhaled slowly. The corruption wasn't just horizontal, it went vertical, and he couldn't take it on alone. "We're going to need internal affairs." Carla hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go there already?" "No choice," he said. "If I wait too long, they'll circle the wagons. I need IA to hit them before they can hide the rest." He filed the report the next morning, an official internal referral, complete with documentation, witness testimony, and a timeline. It was detailed, it was damning, and it carried his signature. By lunch, he got a response. Internal Affairs would be opening a formal investigation, quietly at first. But the dominoes were falling. That night, back at home, he found Tyler in the living room, reading over a school assignment. "Anything interesting?" Darnell asked. Tyler shrugged. "Just some history stuff. Civil rights era. Martin Luther King. Selma. All that." Darnell sat next to him. "It's not just history," he said softly. "It's now, too." Tyler looked at him for a moment. "You think what you're doing will actually change anything?" Darnell didn't speak right away. He thought about all the voices in those reports, all the young men who were never believed, all the kids who'd been told to just keep their heads down and take it. And then he thought about his son. "Yes," he said, "because I have to believe it, and because I'm not doing it alone." Tyler nodded. He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased just a bit. Upstairs, Darnell opened his laptop and checked his email. A message had come through anonymous sender. One line, "Watch your back." He closed the laptop. He wasn't scared. He was ready. Because the truth was no longer just sitting in a folder in his drawer. It was moving. It had momentum, and there was no stopping it now. The ripple didn't take long to become a wave. By the time the Internal Affairs team officially launched their investigation into Officer Rourke, whispers had already turned into muttered conversations, and those conversations into open suspicion. Around the department, Darnell felt the atmosphere change like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. You could sense it in the way doors closed just a little quicker when he walked by, in how greetings got shorter, how smiles disappeared, but none of it slowed him down. In fact, it pushed him harder. The more resistance he felt, the more he knew he was on the right path. Because silence wasn't neutral, it was protection. And in this place, people didn't go quiet for nothing. Carla came into his office late one evening, the fatigue in her eyes giving way to something stronger resolve. "You're going to want to see this," she said, dropping a USB drive onto his desk. Darnell plugged it in without hesitation. The file opened to a blurry but unmistakable video-grainy footage from a convenience store security camera dated nearly 2 years ago. Rourke, clear as day, grabbing a young black man by the collar and shoving him against a rack of snacks. The kid didn't fight back, didn't even flinch. Rourke leaned in, whispered something, then walked away without writing a single word. No paperwork, no call-in, no incident number. "Jesus," Darnell whispered. Carla folded her arms. The clerk finally agreed to talk, said he was scared before, thought nobody would care. Darnell sat back in his chair, staring at the frozen image on screen. That kid's face, that look. It was the same look he'd seen on Tyler. A mix of fear, confusion, and something even deeper, betrayal. "We've got enough," Carla said. "You could take it public now. News outlets are already sniffing around. This would blow it open." Darnell shook his head slowly. "Not yet. I want to bring it to the department first. Let them see the truth before the world does. Give them a chance to choose the right side." She raised an eyebrow. "You think they will?" "I think some will," he said. "And that's enough." 2 days later, he called an emergency staff meeting. The room filled slowly, uneasily. Officers shifted in their seats, some avoiding eye contact, others staring straight ahead like soldiers awaiting orders they already resented. Rourke was there too, arms crossed, that smug expression on his face like he was already writing this off as a waste of time. Darnell stood at the front, a projector casting light behind him onto a whiteboard. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "What I'm about to show you," he said, "isn't about politics. It isn't about vendettas. It's about facts and the reputation of this department." Click. The first slide appeared an incident report from a boy named Devin, 15, stopped, searched, released. No charges, no explanation. Click. A complaint from a young woman harassed outside her own apartment. Click. A video of Rourke, clear as daylight, pulling Tyler's $10 bill from his handbags. Click. The convenience store footage. As the evidence unfolded, the room shifted. First came the murmurs, then the fidgeting. Some officers looked away. Some looked at Rourke. Others looked at Darnell, like they were seeing him for the first time. Rourke stood suddenly. "This is a damn witch hunt," he said loudly. "You've been gunning for me since day one." "No," Darnell said calmly. "I've been watching you, and now everyone else can too." "You think this is justice?" Rourke spat, dragging a fellow officer through the mud in front of outsiders. "These aren't outsiders," Darnell replied. "These are the people who swore the same oath you did, And some of them still remember what it means. The room went quiet. Then, slowly, one officer stood. A younger man, Officer Jenkins, who had joined the force only 2 years ago. He looked nervous, but his voice was steady. "I saw Rourke stop a kid last year. No reason. Just said he fit the profile. I didn't say anything then. I should have." Another officer spoke up, then another. It wasn't an explosion. It was a crumbling. The wall of silence that had protected Rourke for years began to crack, one truth at a time. Rourke didn't say another word. He stormed out of the room, his face flushed with rage, his authority suddenly meaningless. After the meeting, Darnell stayed behind, alone in the conference room. He stood there, staring at the screen still glowing behind him. He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired, exposed, but he also felt something else. Momentum. That night, the story leaked. A small local outlet picked it up first, an unnamed officer under investigation for misconduct. Then, it spread. By morning, news vans were parked outside the department. Reporters called non-stop. Comment sections lit up with debate, anger, and most surprising of all, support. Letters started arriving. Emails. Phone calls from citizens, parents, former victims, even retired officers who finally felt like they could speak. One woman left a voicemail in tears. "Thank you," she said. "He did the same thing to my son. We thought we were alone, but not everyone was grateful." Later that week, Darnell returned to his office to find his desk drawers open, papers rifled through. Nothing stolen, just a message. "Stay in line." He didn't flinch. He changed the locks, then doubled down. He called a community meeting at the local rec center. He stood at the front of a packed gymnasium, teachers, ministers, students, and parents, all waiting to hear what came next. "I know some of you are angry," he began. "You have every right to be, because what happened to my son, what happened to your sons and daughters, shouldn't have happened. Not here, not anywhere." He paused. "But this moment, it isn't just about anger. It's about what we do with it. It's about what comes next." He laid out his planned reforms to reporting systems, transparency in body cam reviews, community oversight panels, and most importantly, accountability. "I won't pretend it'll be easy," he said. "There are people who don't want this to change, people who will fight to keep things exactly as they are. But I promise you this, there will be no more hiding, no more looking the other way. And if they come after me, they'll have to go through all of you too." Applause followed, not thunderous, but real. Afterward, as people lined up to shake his hand, a young woman approached. She wore a hoodie with a university logo, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "My little brother looked up to you," she said. "He wants to be a cop someday. After what happened, he almost gave up. But now he wants to be like you." Darnell smiled. "Tell him we need him, and not to give up. The badge doesn't make you righteous, but what you do with it, that matters." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you." By the time he got home, it was after midnight. Grace was waiting in the living room, half asleep on the couch. "You still breathing?" she asked, smiling through the fatigue. "Barely." He sat beside her, pulled off his shoes, and let out a long, slow breath. "They're fighting back," he said. "But people are starting to stand up." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "So what now?" He looked at her, at the woman who'd challenged him, believed in him, carried the weight with him every step of the way. "Now," he said, "we don't stop," because the truth had cracked through the surface. And now that the light was shining in, there was no going back. The pressure didn't just build, it exploded. Within days of the internal meeting and the public leak, the Montgomery Police Department was no longer a place of whispers and quiet resentment. Now, it was wide open, exposed. Every conversation came with eyes darting over shoulders. Every hallway walk felt like it carried weight. What started as a local story was now splashed across news feeds nationwide. Sheriff exposes systemic abuse in his own department. Black sheriff leads internal takedown of rogue officer. Justice comes from within. Darnell's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, community leaders, former victims, everyone wanted something. A quote, a statement, a promise. And he gave them what he could. But in his heart, he knew the storm had only just begun. Rourke had been suspended pending the investigation, but he wasn't quiet. He'd hired an attorney and released a statement through local media accusing Darnell of personal vendetta, departmental sabotage, and racial bias. The irony of that last one wasn't lost on anyone. More troubling than the noise, though, was the undercurrent that had begun moving within the department itself. Darnell could feel it in the way some officers avoided his gaze, how some reports arrived late, filled with vague language, how certain people who used to be in his corner now stood firmly on the fence. They were waiting to see who would win, and he intended to give them an answer. He called another meeting this time, a closed-door session with the senior staff. The room was tense from the moment he stepped inside. Some officers sat with arms crossed, jaws tight. Others looked anxious, eyes flicking toward the door like they were deciding whether to stay or walk out. Darnell stood at the head of the table, flanked by Carla on one side and a representative from Internal Affairs on the other. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I know some of you think this is a betrayal," he said. "I know some of you feel like I've turned on my own. But I didn't betray this badge. Rourke did. And anyone who protected him did too." He paused, scanning the room. "I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to protect the people of this city, even when it's from ourselves. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe it should." There was silence. But silence says more than words. And from that moment forward, the line was drawn. There was no middle ground left. That same evening, Darnell walked into a packed auditorium for a town hall meeting. The room buzzed with energy, anger, hope, curiosity. The story had brought out everyone: ministers, high schoolers, retired teachers, young activists, elders who'd lived through the civil rights movement and thought they'd never see a day like this again. He stepped up to the microphone, heart pounding. "I didn't come here tonight as a sheriff," he said. "I came here as a father." The room fell still. What happened to my son should never happen to anyone's child. And what I discovered afterward shook me to my core, not because I didn't expect it, but because I knew it was there. And it still hit me anyway. He told them about the complaints, the cover-ups, the silent complicity. He laid it bare not to gain sympathy, but to demand accountability. This department is not broken because one man abused his power. It's broken because so many people let him do it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others teared up. One man stood up, a veteran with weathered skin and fire in his voice. "I've been stopped 5 times in the last 2 years just walking home from work. Each time, same excuse. Suspicious activity. I file a complaint, never hear back. And I got a clean record." "This ain't new." Another voice from the back, a woman in her 40s, arms crossed tightly. "My son was pushed into a police car 2 blocks from here for running too fast." You know what running too fast means? It means he was late for football practice. That was 4 months ago. You know who the officer was? She didn't need to say it. Darnell stepped back to the mic. And that's why this doesn't stop with suspension or with headlines. This ends when we rebuild the trust from the ground up, not with promises, but with policy, with transparency, with action. He outlined the changes already underway: new body cam regulations, independent review boards, public complaint logs, mandatory bias training. He made it clear that nothing would be hidden again, that every name, every badge, every decision would be accountable to the people who paid for their authority. As the applause echoed through the gymnasium, Darnell felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. But the battle wasn't over. The following morning, a memo circulated from within the department, anonymous. But the message was clear. It accused Darnell of destroying morale, dividing the force, and using personal tragedy as a weapon. It was signed, concerned officers of Montgomery. He stared at it for a full minute before sliding it across his desk toward Carla. Cowards don't sign their names, Carla shrugged. They're scared, and scared people lash out. Good, Darnell said. Let them feel what the people in those reports felt every time they walked out the door and wondered who was going to treat them like a suspect for existing. Internal affairs ramped up. Investigators began pulling records, interviewing officers, tracking data. The complaints grew. Former victims showed up with statements, photos, dates. Several officers came forward anonymously, admitting they'd seen or heard things, and stayed quiet. The tipping point came when the state attorney general's office got involved. They called Darnell personally. "You've got their attention," the AG said, "and you've got backing. If you want to take this all the way, we're ready." Darnell didn't hesitate. "Let's go." The next step was formal charges. Rourke was arrested, not quietly, not diplomatically, but publicly. The video footage was shown in court, the confrontation with Tyler, the theft of the $10 bill, the smirk, the taunts, the dismissal. More footage followed, more testimony. Each piece, another nail in the coffin of a man who had operated for years with the confidence that nothing would ever touch him. And when the cuffs finally clicked around his wrists, there were no protests, no cheers, just silence. A deep, collective silence. A breath held for too long, finally released. Darnell stood on the courthouse steps afterward, reporters crowding in, mics shoved forward. "Do you feel vindicated?" one asked. "No," he said. "I feel responsible." "For what?" another pressed. "For letting it go on as long as it did. For not digging sooner. For thinking silence was safer than shaking the system." "And what now?" a third asked. Darnell looked out at the crowd. The city. His city. "Now we rebuild," he said. "And we don't look away again." That night he sat with Tyler on the back porch. The cicadas buzzed in the trees, and the stars blinked softly above them. "Did he go to jail?" Tyler asked. "He did," Darnell said. Tyler nodded slowly. "Do you think it'll change anything?" Darnell put an arm around his son's shoulders. "I think it already has." And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, they didn't talk about pain or anger or injustice. They just sat, together, in peace, even if only for a night. The courtroom was dead silent, the kind of silence that wraps around your chest and squeezes tight and unforgiving. Greg Rourke stood stiff at the defendant's table, jaw clenched, eyes locked straight ahead like he was daring the world to blink first. His once smug expression was gone. No smirk, no bravado, just a hollow stare, like maybe if he didn't move, none of this would be real. But it was. The judge's voice echoed through the room, flat, firm, final. Guilty on all counts. 3 words. That's all it took to break a years-long chain of denial, corruption, and abuse. All the cover-ups, all the ignored complaints, all the damage undeniable now. Irreversible. In the gallery, Darnell sat motionless, his hands folded tightly in his lap, heart pounding like a slow drum against his ribs. Beside him, Grace reached for his hand. On his other side, Tyler. The boy didn't cheer, didn't smile. He just exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. And maybe he had. Rourke turned briefly toward the gallery, like he wanted to see who'd been bold enough to bring him down. His gaze met Darnell's, and there, in the former officer's eyes, wasn't rage or fear. It was disbelief. Like he still couldn't wrap his head around how a black sheriff had dared to hold him accountable. How this system, one he'd relied on for protection, had turned its back on him. He was escorted out in cuffs, and the room stayed still for a long beat after the door closed. No applause, just relief. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip behind the courthouse. Reporters crowded the steps. Cameras rolled, microphones stretched forward. But Darnell didn't stop to speak. Not yet. He didn't need the soundbite. The verdict had already said enough. Back at the station, change came quickly. Officers who had quietly supported Rourke, or simply looked the other way, began resigning. Some before they were pushed. Some before the internal affairs interviews landed at their desks. Others were formally disciplined suspensions, demotions, even terminations. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clearing the rot. And for the first time in a long time, the department felt like it was breathing again. Carla stepped into Darnell's office the next morning, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Well," she said, handing him one, "that was historic." He took the cup, gave her a small, tired smile. "You think it's over?" She shook her head. "Nope, but it's a hell of a turning point." The department didn't just stop at firing bad actors. Under Darnell's lead, they began rebuilding from the ground up. New officer training focused on bias awareness and community connection. Monthly town halls were instituted. Bodycam footage became part of an independent review system accessible by public request. People noticed, not just in Montgomery, but across the state. Other departments started asking for their reform model. Civil rights groups reached out to collaborate. And for the first time in decades, local community members began stepping into the station not as victims or complainers, but as partners. Still, it wasn't easy. Darnell faced resistance from old guard officers who saw the changes as weakness. Anonymous threats continued. Rumors swirled, fueled by resentment and fear, but they couldn't stop what had already begun. One afternoon, Darnell received a call from the mayor. She'd been quiet through most of the ordeal, keeping her distance, letting the process run its course. But this time, her voice carried respect. "Sheriff Brooks," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't just root out a bad cop. You reminded us what leadership looks like." He accepted the compliment, but he didn't bask in it, because he knew there was still more to do. A few weeks later, he held a press conference not to defend anything, but to set the tone for what came next. He stood behind the podium, flanked by Carla, a few community leaders, and 2 new recruits who represented the next generation of the department, one black, one Latino, both born and raised in Montgomery. "We can't undo what was done," Darnell said into the microphone, his voice strong but steady. "But we can make sure it never happens again. We owe that to every child who ever walked down the street afraid, to every parent who wondered if letting their kid out the door meant risking their life." He looked directly into the cameras. "We owe it to Tyler." At home, Tyler was changing too. There was a new lightness in the way he carried himself. He still asked hard questions, still processed what had happened in his own quiet way. But something had shifted. His father had stood up not just for him, but for everyone like him. And that mattered. At school, kids whispered about it, some with admiration, some with curiosity. One teacher even asked Tyler to write about the experience for a class assignment. He declined. Not yet. But later that night, he told Darnell, "Maybe I'll write about it someday. When I know how to put it into words." Darnell smiled. "Take your time," he said. "Truth waits for no one, but it always shows up when you're ready." That weekend, they visited Darnell's father's grave. The old man had been a preacher, a fighter, and a survivor of a different kind of injustice. Tyler placed a single white rose on the stone while Darnell stood behind him, hands in his pockets, heart full. "He would have been proud of you," Grace said softly. Darnell looked at the name carved into the granite, then at the boy standing beside it. "I hope so." The next day, a new recruit stopped Darnell in the hallway, nervous, unsure, maybe 24 at most. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I signed up. I used to think cops like you didn't exist." Darnell nodded, offered a handshake. "Now you make sure people like Rourke never do again." The recruit smiled. "Yes, sir." Meanwhile, Carla continued tracking the ripple effects. Complaint numbers dropped, not because people were afraid to speak, but because officers were listening. Mediation programs launched. A few media outlets even dubbed Montgomery a blueprint for grassroots justice reform. Darnell didn't care about the headlines. He cared about what he saw on the street. Kids walking home from school without flinching when a cruiser rolled by. Mothers speaking freely at neighborhood watch meetings. People waving again, Not because everything was fixed, but because they believed it could be. One night, Tyler came into his father's office while he was reviewing files. "Hey," he said, "I was thinking, maybe I do want to talk to that teacher." Darnell looked up, smiled. Yeah? I think I want to tell the story. Not just mine, yours too." Darnell leaned back in his chair. "What would you call it?" Tyler shrugged, then smirked. $10 and a badge." Darnell laughed. "That's not bad." Tyler shrugged again. "It's not just about the money. It's about what it represented. You already sound like a storyteller." I had a good example. They sat there, just the two of them. No cameras, no courtrooms, no reporters, just father and son in the quiet aftermath of something big. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been clean, but it had been necessary. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like justice had a foothold. And this time, they weren't letting go. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Darnell finally let himself breathe. Not the shallow kind of breath he'd taken over the last few weeks, the kind laced with tension, responsibility, and the weight of eyes watching. This one was deeper, full, a breath that came from a place of peace, however temporary. The sun was soft over the front porch, casting golden light on the neighborhood he had sworn to protect, one hard-earned reform at a time. Birds chirped from the oak trees overhead. Kids played down the street, their laughter echoing faintly through the breeze. For the first time in a long time, the world didn't feel like it was pressing down. Tyler sat across from him at the patio table, a chessboard between them. His face was calm, focused, more grown-up than he had any right to look at 13. Darnell moved a pawn forward. Tyler countered with a knight. "I think I'm getting better," the boy said, smirking. "You're definitely getting bolder," Darnell replied with a grin. "You used to play scared," Tyler shrugged. "Guess I don't feel scared anymore." The words hit harder than Darnell expected. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded and stared at the board. There was a time just weeks ago when that confidence had nearly been stripped away. One moment, one man, one badge misused. But now? Now his son could say he wasn't scared. That meant everything. Across town, the Montgomery Police Department was no longer the same place. The walls hadn't changed. The name on the building was still the same. But the energy inside? That had shifted. Officers walked differently, more aware, more engaged. And those who couldn't get on board with the new standard had quietly moved on. The culture was evolving, slowly, stubbornly. But it was moving. Darnell had pushed forward with community oversight, mandatory training, full transparency in all disciplinary reviews. And he made sure that no one, no matter their rank or tenure, was exempt. He knew it wouldn't make him universally loved. He didn't care. He wasn't there to be liked. He was there to be trusted. And trust, he'd learned, was earned through consistency, not convenience. At church that morning, the pastor had called his name from the pulpit, thanked him publicly. The congregation stood and clapped, some even with tears in their eyes, but Darnell just bowed his head. Because this wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning of something new. That afternoon, he sat down with Carla at the precinct for one final strategy session before the end of the quarter. "You did it," she said, flipping through a final batch of reports. "Complaints are down, community engagement is up, we're not perfect, but we're better," Darnell finished. She smiled. A lot better. They both knew the work wasn't over. It never would be. But the foundation was there now, built not on silence and fear, but on accountability and truth. Back at home, Tyler was writing again. A paper for school this time. He titled it, "The Day the System Got Caught Sleeping." His words were raw, thoughtful, honest. He didn't focus on his dad being the sheriff. He didn't paint himself as a victim, either. Instead, he talked about choices, about the power of speaking up, even when you feel small, about the moment he saw his father stand in front of a wall of resistance and push anyway. Darnell read it quietly that evening, eyes misting over. He didn't say much, just gave the paper back and said, You wrote what most grown men are too afraid to say, Tyler smiled. That's because I watched you say it first. That night, Grace made dinner, and the three of them sat around the table like old times. No phones, no courtrooms, no breaking news notifications. Just family, just normal. But it wasn't normal. It was better. Later, while washing dishes, Grace turned to Darnell. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in that day? If you just let it go? He dried his hands slowly. Every day. And? He looked at her, then looked down the hallway where Tyler's voice echoed faintly as he laughed on a phone call with a friend. I'd be looking at a different boy right now, he said. One who didn't believe justice was possible. One who stopped asking questions. Grace nodded, her eyes softening. But instead, you showed him what justice really looks like. Darnell leaned against the counter, exhaustion finally starting to slip from his bones. I just didn't want him to grow up thinking power always wins. Because it doesn't, she said. Not when people fight for something better. He smiled. Exactly. Outside, the stars began to rise. The town of Montgomery, once the backdrop of quiet injustices, now carried the rumble of something new: accountability, trust, a sheriff who didn't flinch when it mattered most. And in one house, on a quiet street, a boy who had once been shamed over a $10 bill was now thinking about how to make his voice reach even farther, because he had seen what was possible, and he wasn't afraid anymore. Not of speaking up, not of being seen, not of fighting back. And that, more than any verdict, any policy, or any reform, was the real victory. Sometimes, it's not the loudest moments that shape a life. It's the quiet ones. A father standing beside his son, a choice not to lash out, but to rise up. In this story, we saw what happens when justice doesn't come from anger, but from courage, from patience, from the relentless will to do what's right, even when the system says to stay silent. To those of you watching, especially our elders, you know what it means to wait for justice. You've seen the world change, and sometimes stay the same. But this story is a reminder that it's never too late to speak up, never too late to stand for truth. Even when the odds feel stacked against us, even when we're tired, your voice still matters. Darnell didn't just fight for his son, he fought for every child who's ever been made to feel small. And he showed us all that change doesn't come from titles or power, it comes from character, from heart. So if you believe in stories that matter, stories that move us, and make us think, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone you care about, and hit that subscribe button, because your support helps keep these stories alive and helps justice keep speaking loud and clear.